You should be cooking and cleaning, taking care of me and my son, not sitting around playing silly games. My mother-in-law screamed, her face red with rage, as she yanked my laptop cord from the wall socket and violently smashed the device onto the hardwood floor. She expected me to cry. She expected me to cower and beg for forgiveness. Instead, I calmly picked up my phone and made a single call that would end her privileged life forever. My name is Lauren. I am 34 years old, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of a boutique cybersecurity firm. For 3 years, I tolerated my husband Jared and his deeply entitled mother Barbara. I endured her constant belittling and her outdated views on the place of a woman in the home. But that shattered laptop was the final straw. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set firm boundaries with toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your power. The argument started on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island in an affluent Atlanta suburb, deep into a security audit for a corporate client. Jared had left for his brokerage firm hours ago, leaving me to deal with Barbara, who had supposedly come over to help us organize the house. In reality, her visits were just an excuse to inspect my housekeeping skills and find new reasons to criticize me. She despised the fact that I worked from home, viewing my intense focus on my screens as sheer laziness. To Barbara, a real wife served her husband, kept the house spotless, and certainly did not out-earn her son. "Are you even listening to me, Lauren?" she demanded, marching into the kitchen and slapping a dusty cleaning rag onto the pristine quartz countertop. "Jared works grueling hours to provide this beautiful home for you, and you cannot even be bothered to dust the guest room. What kind of wife sits around staring at a screen all day while her husband breaks his back?" I did not look up from my code. "Barbara, I am in the middle of a federal compliance check. I do not have time to dust right now. If it bothers you, the cleaning service comes on Thursday." My calm dismissal infuriated her. Barbara was a woman who demanded absolute submission, a classic boy mom who viewed any independence in her daughter-in-law as a personal attack. She stormed around the kitchen island, her breath coming in heavy huffs. "A cleaning service. You spend the money of my son on a cleaning service because you are too lazy to do the job of a woman," she shrieked. "You are useless, a complete freeloader playing computer hobbies while Jared pays for your entire existence." She lunged forward, gripping the power cord of my secure terminal laptop and yanked the plug from the wall. In a fit of malice, she lifted the heavy machine and slammed it onto the oak floor. The screen spiderwebbed instantly, the casing cracked open, and the cooling fan let out a dying whine before going completely dead. Silence fell over the kitchen. Barbara stood panting, looking down at the destroyed machine with a triumphant smirk. There she sneered, dusting her hands together as if she had just taken out the trash. "Now maybe you can finally do a load of laundry and make yourself useful around here." I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply stared at the ruined hardware, calculating the massive financial and legal implications of what she had just done. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and dialed 911. "Yes, hello," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I need an officer dispatched to my residence immediately. Someone has broken into my home office setup and destroyed expensive corporate property. The perpetrator is still on the premises." Barbara smirked, but it faltered for a fraction of a second before morphing into a harsh, mocking laugh. "You are calling the police on me, your own mother-in-law!" she cackled, shaking her head in disbelief. "Go right ahead, Lauren. Let them come. What are you going to tell them? That I broke your little toy? The police are going to laugh in your face. They will side with an elder over a hysterical, lazy housewife any day of the week. In fact, I will tell them you were threatening me in the house of my own son." She crossed her arms, standing her ground with supreme arrogance. She truly believed that because Jared was a man who wore expensive suits and worked in finance, this house, and everything in it, belonged entirely to him. She thought I was a dependent, a guest in the castle of her son. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Two officers stepped up to the door, and I let them in. The moment they entered the kitchen, Barbara launched into her theatrical performance. She clutched her chest, forcing tears into her eyes, playing the terrified victim to absolute perfection. Officers, thank goodness you are here, she gasped, pointing a finger at me. My daughter is unhinged. She is a freeloader who refuses to work, and when I gently reminded her to clean the house, she went crazy. She is trying to kick me out of the house of my son. I am an old woman, and I do not feel safe with her here. You need to remove her immediately before she hurts me. The officer turned to me, his expression stern. Officer, is this true? Whose house is this? I walked over to the secure filing cabinet in my office, quietly unlocked the metal drawer, and silently handed the property deed to the police officer. The taller officer adjusted his heavy radio belt and took the thick manila folder from my hands. He scanned the embossed property deed, his eyes moving meticulously over the legal jargon, before landing squarely on the ownership section. The document clearly stated that this $1.2 million estate was the sole property of Apex Security Limited Liability Company. He looked from the paper to me, then over to Barbara, who was still dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. Ma'am, the officer said, addressing my mother-in-law with a flat tone. According to these county records, the homeowner is a corporate entity. He turned back to me. Can you verify your legal relationship to this business? I pulled a sleek black binder from my desk drawer. I am the founder, sole proprietor, and chief executive officer of Apex Security. I purchased this property in full using corporate assets before I even married Jared. My husband has absolutely zero equity, zero ownership, and zero legal standing to claim this property as his own. Barbara stopped her fake crying instantly. The tissue fell from her hand, fluttering to the floor like a white flag of surrender she was too stubborn to raise. What on earth are you talking about? She demanded, her voice losing its frail victim pitch and returning to its usual grating screech. Jared is a highly successful investment broker. He bought this house for you. You are just trying to confuse the police with your ridiculous corporate nonsense. Jared is a tenant by marriage, I replied calmly, locking eyes with her across the kitchen island. And right now you are an unwelcome guest who just committed felony destruction of property. I turned back to the officers. Gentlemen, I would like this woman removed from my property immediately. She is trespassing, she has grown violent, and she just destroyed a machine that contains highly sensitive federal data. The officers exchanged a significant look. The dynamic in the room had completely shifted away from her favor. The shorter officer stepped toward Barbara, holding up a hand to calm her down. Ma'am, since you are not the homeowner and the legal owner, is requesting you to leave the premises, you need to step outside right now. Barbara went absolutely ballistic. The veins in her neck bulged dangerously, and her face turned a deep shade of crimson. You cannot kick me out of the house of my own son, she roared, pointing a shaking manicured finger at the officer. This is a scam. She is a liar. My son pays the mortgage. He pays for the lights, the water, the food she eats. She sits around doing nothing all day. You need to arrest her. Arrest her for fraud right now. I did not even blink at her furious outburst. Instead, I opened the black binder to the financial section and handed the officers the past 12 months of bank statements. These highlighted documents show every single utility bill, property tax payment, and maintenance fee paid directly from my personal checking account and my corporate accounts. Jared does not contribute a single dime to the upkeep of this property. In fact, if you look closely at the bottom line, you will see that I am the sole financial provider for this entire household. The taller officer flipped through the statements, nodding slowly, as the undeniable proof of my financial independence stared him in the face. He handed the papers back to me and turned his full attention to Barbara, who was now hyperventilating with genuine rage. Ma'am, the officer said, his tone no longer holding any patience. We have reviewed the documentation. The homeowner has explicitly revoked your permission to be on the premises. You are officially trespassing. I need you to gather your things and walk out the front door right now. If you refuse, we will be forced to remove you. Barbara looked like she had been slapped across the face. The reality of the situation was finally piercing her thick bubble of entitlement. She looked around the kitchen as if expecting Jared to magically appear and save her from this humiliation. But the house was empty, save for the four of us. You cannot do this, she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. I am his mother. I am family. You are a vandal, I corrected her sharply. The police moved closer to her. One last warning, ma'am. Walk out the door. But Barbara simply could not accept defeat. She could not accept that the woman she viewed as a lazy subordinate held absolute power over her. In a final desperate act of defiance, she lunged toward the kitchen counter, aiming to grab a heavy ceramic vase to smash on the floor. The officers reacted instantly. Before her hands could even close around the vase, they grabbed her arms, spinning her around forcefully. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking into place echoed loudly in the pristine kitchen. Hey, let me go, get your hands off me, she shrieked, kicking wildly as the officers secured her wrists behind her back. You are making a huge mistake. Do you know who my son is? He is going to sue this entire department. The officers ignored her threats, marching her toward the front hallway. Ma'am, you are under arrest for trespassing and destruction of property. You have the right to remain silent. One of the officers recited, his voice completely devoid of emotion. As they dragged her through the foyer, Barbara twisted her head back to look at me one last time. Her eyes were wide with a venomous hatred that chilled the air. You are going to pay for this, Lauren. She screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing out the open front door for all the wealthy neighbors to hear. Jared is going to divorce you. He is going to take half of everything you own. He will leave you with absolutely nothing. You hear me? Nothing. I stood in the doorway watching the police officers force my struggling, screaming mother-in-law into the back of their cruiser. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the manicured lawns of my upscale neighborhood, drawing curious stares from the people next door. I watched the cruiser pull away, taking the toxic matriarch out of my life in the most humiliating way possible. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I walked back inside and closed the front door, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying click. But as I turned to face the empty house, my eyes fell on the shattered laptop resting on the kitchen floor. The initial adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating reality. Barbara thought she had just broken a random computer. She thought this was just a petty domestic dispute that Jared could fix by yelling at me later. She had absolutely no idea what that specific machine was actually doing when she ripped the cord from the wall. The real war was not about the house, and it was certainly not about my housekeeping skills. The real war was about to begin the moment Jared realized exactly how much money his mother had just cost us, and how little power he actually possessed in our marriage. Exactly 63 minutes after the police cruiser hauled Barbara away, the heavy oak front door of my house slammed open with such force that it bounced off the entryway wall. The loud thud echoed through the silent hallway, signaling the arrival of the storm I had been waiting for. Jared stormed inside, his expensive Italian suit jacket, discarded, his tie loosened, and his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He did not bother to take off his shoes, tracking dirt onto the pristine floor as he marched directly into the kitchen, where I was still standing staring at the shattered remains of my laptop. I expected him to ask what had happened. I expected him to look at the destroyed corporate hardware on the floor and demand an explanation for the chaos. That is what a normal husband would do. But Jared was not a normal husband, and this was not a normal marriage. He bypassed the wreckage entirely, marching right up to the kitchen island and slamming his fists down onto the quartz countertop. Are you out of your mind? He roared, his voice cracking with the sheer volume of his rage. Are you completely insane? You had my mother arrested. You called the cops and had her dragged out of here like a common criminal. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on the counter. She was trespassing, Jared. I replied, my voice steady and devoid of the hysteria he was clearly projecting. I asked her to leave. She refused. She then proceeded to violently destroy corporate property. The police simply enforced the law. My calm demeanor only seemed to enrage him further. He threw his hands up in the air, pacing the length of the kitchen like a caged animal. Trespassing. In her own son's house, Jared scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You are sick, Lauren. You have always been jealous of my mother, And now you have gone way too far. I want you to call the precinct right now. You are going to drop the charges, you are going to beg for her forgiveness, and you are going to pay for whatever emotional distress you just caused her." I did not move. I did not flinch. I just stared at him, observing the man I had married. The man who cared more about the wounded pride of his abusive mother than the destruction of my property or my safety in my own home. "I am not calling anyone, Jared," I said coldly. "And I am certainly not paying for her emotional distress. She broke my equipment, and she will face the legal consequences of her actions. If you want to bail her out, you are welcome to use your own money to do so." Jared stopped pacing. He planted his feet and glared at me, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across his face. The charming, successful investment broker facade completely dropped, revealing the arrogant, entitled boy underneath. "My own money," he sneered, taking a step closer to me. "You think you are so smart, Lauren. You think you are untouchable because your little security firm had one good quarter and you managed to put the house in a fancy LLC." He let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. "Well, I have news for you. You are not as independent as you think." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Jared leaned across the kitchen island, his face mere inches from mine, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and mint mints. "I am talking about reality, Lauren. I am talking about the fact that our joint credit cards are completely maxed out. Every single one of them. You are bleeding us dry with your supposed business expenses, and I am the one holding the bag. You think you are carrying this family financially, you are dragging us under." The air in the kitchen seemed to vanish. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden icy knot forming in the pit of my stomach. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer absurdity of his accusation. I had not touched our joint credit cards in over 8 months. I paid for all of my business expenses through my corporate accounts, and I covered all the household bills from my personal checking. The joint accounts were supposed to be our safety net, a shared financial pool that we both contributed to for emergencies and future investments. We had built up a significant reserve in our joint savings precisely because I had been aggressive about funding it from my recent corporate bonuses. "I have not used the joint credit cards, Jared," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Not for business, not for personal use, not for anything." Jared rolled his eyes, clearly believing I was lying to save face. "Please, Lauren, stop playing the victim. I saw the statements, thousands of dollars in charges. Who else would be spending that kind of money? You have to pay for your fancy server equipment somehow, right? Do not stand there and tell me you are innocent while you drain our accounts." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened my banking app, relying on the biometric scan to log in instantly. I navigated to the joint accounts overview the screen, loading the financial truth that Jared was either ignoring or deliberately manipulating. I pulled up the credit card balances first. He was right about one thing. They were maxed out. Every single card linked to our joint name showed a balance hovering right at its limit. But the charges were not for server equipment or business expenses. The transaction history was a litany of charges from luxury restaurants, high-end retail stores, and massive unexplained cash advances. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I quickly swiped over to the joint savings account, the account that we had agreed to treat as our untouchable nest egg. The account that, as of yesterday morning when I had checked it to confirm a routine transfer, held exactly $120,000. The screen refreshed, displaying the current balance in stark, unyielding digits. I froze. The blood drained from my face and the kitchen seemed to spin around me. I stared at the number, my mind refusing to accept the reality of what the screen was telling me. The $120,000 was gone. The joint savings account, the foundation of our shared financial future, now had a balance of exactly $14.32. I held the phone out, turning the glowing screen so the harsh numbers faced him directly. $14.32. I kept my voice dangerously low, the kind of quiet that precedes an explosion. "Where is the money, Jared? Where is the $120,000 that was sitting in this exact account yesterday morning?" For a split second, the arrogant smirk vanished from his face. His eyes darted from the phone screen to my face and back again. He shifted his weight suddenly, looking like a cornered animal, rather than the master of the house he pretended to be. But Jared was a salesman at his core, and a salesman always has a pivot ready. He scoffed, waving a hand dismissively, as if a missing fortune was nothing more than a trivial accounting error. Relax, Lauren. He sighed, rolling his eyes as he walked around the kitchen island to pour himself a glass of water. You are being hysterical over absolutely nothing. The money is not gone. It is working for us. Working for us. I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone case. Explain exactly what that means right now. Jared took a slow, deliberate sip of water, adopting his best patronizing financial advisor tone. He leaned against the counter, crossing his ankles to project an image of total control and superiority. I moved the funds into a highly exclusive, high-yield offshore investment portfolio. It is a closed fund, invitation only. I had to act incredibly fast to secure our position before the market shifted and locked us out completely. I stared at him, the sheer audacity of his lie leaving me momentarily speechless. You emptied our joint savings account, maxed out our shared credit cards, and locked our entire liquid net worth in an offshore account, without consulting me once, I asked, spelling out his financial betrayal word by word so he could not escape it. Jared slammed his water glass down hard on the quartz countertop. Someone has to be the adult in this marriage, Lauren. He snapped, his voice rising again in defensive anger. I did it to secure our future. Your little boutique cybersecurity firm is way too volatile. One bad month, one lost client, and your whole business model could collapse. You sit around playing hacker all day, pretending to run a real company, while I am out there in the trenches, dealing with actual wealth creation. I had to diversify our assets to protect us from your highly unpredictable income stream. The gaslighting was so textbook it was almost insulting. He was standing in a $1.2 million house that my volatile business had purchased outright, drinking water paid for by my unpredictable income, and trying to convince me that draining our life savings was a selfless act of financial heroism. You stole from us, I stated plainly, refusing to let him twist the narrative to his advantage. You completely drained the emergency fund, and you expect me to believe it was for my own good. Jared uncrossed his ankles and stepped aggressively toward me, his face flushing with renewed anger. I did not steal anything. I am an investment broker. I know what I'm doing with capital. But right now we have a much bigger problem than your irrational paranoia about our portfolio. He pointed a finger toward the front door, where the police had just exited with his screaming mother. My mother is sitting in a holding cell because of your psychotic behavior. She needs bail money, and she needs a good defense lawyer immediately. Since my liquidity is temporarily tied up in the offshore fund generating massive returns, and the credit cards are tapped, you are going to fix this mess. You need to sell off some of your LLC shares, or liquidate whatever corporate hardware you have lying around. Get the cash, bail her out of jail, and we can sort out the credit card debt later when my fund pays out. The demand hung in the heavy kitchen air, utterly absurd. He wanted me to sell parts of my successful company to rescue the woman who had just destroyed my federal audit hardware, simply because he had secretly gambled away our entire life savings. I looked at the man I had married 3 years ago, and the illusion completely shattered. I did not see a partner standing before me. I did not see a loving husband. I saw a parasitic financial predator who viewed me as nothing more than a convenient ATM to fund his delusions. I am not selling a single share of Apex Security, I replied, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I am not liquidating any of my assets, and I am certainly not spending a single dime to bail out the unstable woman who just committed corporate sabotage against my firm. You want to help your mother figure out how to liquidate your imaginary offshore investment. Jared stared at me, his chest heaving with exertion. You selfish witch, he hissed, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. You are going to do exactly what I say, or I swear I will make your life a living hell. Before he could escalate his desperate threat into physical intimidation, a frantic, echoing pounding erupted against the heavy oak front door. The knocks were rapid, aggressive, and desperate, completely shattering the tense standoff in our kitchen. Jared froze, his head snapping toward the entryway in surprise. The loud pounding continued unabated, followed by the muffled sound of a woman crying and frantically shouting our names through the thick wood. It was Rebecca, his status-obsessed sister, and I could hear the deep, calming voice of her husband DeAndre, trying to settle her down on the front porch. Barbara had clearly used her one phone call from the police station, sending her daughter into absolute hysterics and bringing this familial nightmare directly to my doorstep. Jared practically sprinted across the foyer, tearing the front door open before Rebecca could shatter the solid oak with her frantic pounding. His sister burst into the entryway like a localized hurricane. Rebecca was usually the picture of curated perfection, carefully documenting her upper-class suburban lifestyle for her thousands of social media followers. Today, however, her designer sunglasses were shoved haphazardly into her messy blonde hair, and her face was streaked with running makeup. Close behind her stepped DeAndre. Her husband was a towering presence, a highly respected forensic accountant, whose sharp mind was matched only by his naturally calm and imposing demeanor. He closed the door quietly immediately, assessing the chaotic energy in the room with analytical precision. "Where is she?" Rebecca shrieked, pushing past her brother and charging directly toward me in the kitchen. "What did you do to our mother?" She called me from a holding cell, sobbing her eyes out. "You actually had her arrested. You psychotic monster." I did not back away as Rebecca invaded my personal space. I stood tall, meeting her manic energy with absolute stillness. "Your mother broke into my secure workspace and destroyed thousands of dollars of corporate hardware," I replied evenly. "The police removed a trespasser who committed property damage. It is a very straightforward legal matter, Rebecca." "Straightforward?" Rebecca gasped, her voice reaching a pitch that rattled the glassware in the cabinets. "You are a complete sociopath, Lauren. She is family. You do not call the cops on family over a stupid computer. But you know what? You have finally crossed the line. I am going to destroy you for this. I am getting on my phone right now, and I'm going to broadcast exactly what kind of gold-digging trash you are to my entire network. I will tag your little business, your clients, everyone. I will make sure your reputation is completely ruined before the sun goes down." She pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying aggressively across the screen. "And that is not all," she continued, looking up with a venomous glare. "I am calling the Homeowners Association board. I am personal friends with the president. You brought a police cruiser with flashing lights into this neighborhood in the middle of the day. You created a massive ghetto disturbance that makes all of us look bad. The HOA has strict rules against running disruptive commercial operations out of residential properties. I am going to see to it that your fake little company is evicted from this community. We will fine you into bankruptcy, Lauren." Jared nodded eagerly, emboldened by the arrival of his sister. "Tell her, Rebecca. Tell her she cannot get away with treating our family like this. She thinks she owns this place." I watched the two of them feed off each other's toxic energy. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they could not see the reality of the situation. Rebecca was threatening to evict me from a house that my business legally owned outright, while Jared was cheering her on, completely ignoring the fact that he had just drained our life savings. Before I could verbally dismantle her threats, DeAndre stepped forward. He placed a large, steady hand over his wife's phone, gently pushing it down. "Rebecca, stop!" he commanded, his deep voice easily cutting through the shrill screaming. "Making a scene on social media is not going to get your mother out of a holding cell. We need to focus on the immediate problem." He turned his attention to Jared, his analytical eyes narrowing slightly. "Jared, the police said bail is set at $5,000. Rebecca and I rushed over here straight from the gym, and we do not have our checkbooks or primary cards on us. Just wire the bail money to the precinct, or run down to the bank and get a cashier's check. Let us get Barbara out of the system, and you two can sort out this domestic dispute privately later." The air in the kitchen suddenly grew impossibly thick. The aggressive, triumphant posture Jared had adopted just seconds ago instantly evaporated. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he looked anywhere but at his brother-in-law. "Well," Jared stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. "The thing is, DeAndre, my capital is a bit tied up right now. I cannot just easily pull $5,000 in liquid cash this exact second." DeAndre frowned, clearly confused. "Tied up? You are a senior investment broker, Jared. You do not have $5,000 in a liquid checking account. What about your joint savings? Just pull it from there for the afternoon. I watched Jared squirm, feeling a cold satisfaction. He could not admit the truth in front of the man he constantly tried to impress. Jared desperately wanted DeAndre and Rebecca to believe he was a massive financial success. Admitting he was completely broke would destroy his carefully curated image. It is not that simple, Jared said, his voice rising in defensive panic. I just executed a major portfolio reallocation. Everything is in a closed offshore fund right now. It is incredibly high yield, but highly illiquid for the next quarter. I cannot just pull cash out without facing severe penalty fees and disrupting the entire growth strategy. You guys are going to have to front the bail money. I will pay you back as soon as my dividends clear. DeAndre stared at him. As an African American man who had fought tooth and nail to build a pristine career in forensic accounting, DeAndre spent his days tracking hidden assets and identifying corporate fraud. He had an internal lie detector that was second to none. He knew exactly what a wealthy portfolio looked like, and he knew that genuine high net worth individuals never lacked basic liquidity for a $5,000 emergency. Jared, DeAndre said slowly, his tone shifting from helpful brother-in-law to professional interrogator. You are telling me you locked 100% of your liquid assets into an inaccessible offshore account that violates every basic rule of wealth management. Who is the fund manager? Where is the capital housed? I am not discussing my proprietary investment strategies with you right now, DeAndre. Jared shouted, his face turning red. My mother is in jail. Just put it on your credit card and stop interrogating me. As Jared flailed frantically, trying to deflect the questioning, the screen of his iPad, which was resting on the kitchen counter just inches from DeAndre's hand, suddenly lit up. The bright display caught DeAndre's eye. He glanced down casually, but his professional gaze locked onto the notification banner glowing on the lock screen. I saw the exact moment the realization hit DeAndre. His broad shoulders stiffened, and the confusion on his face morphed into a mask of pure, absolute shock. The notification was not an email from a prestigious wealth management firm. It was a push alert from an unverified, notorious offshore crypto exchange based in the Bahamas. The text on the screen was painfully clear, displaying a bright red warning icon. Urgent account notice. Margin call. Liquidation imminent. Please deposit additional funds immediately to maintain your leveraged positions. DeAndre did not move. He stood completely frozen, staring at the glowing iPad screen as the devastating truth clicked into place. He looked up slowly, his eyes shifting from the warning about offshore crypto gambling directly to Jared, who was still loudly demanding someone else pay his mother's bail. The forensic accountant had just found the missing money. DeAndre processed the text on the glowing iPad screen. His voice dropped an entire octave to cut through the frantic energy Rebecca projected. Jared, DeAndre said, stepping closer. Since when does an investment broker use an unverified offshore crypto exchange in the Bahamas to house a closed fund? Jared froze. The color drained from his face. He followed the gaze of his brother-in-law down to the screen, and absolute panic set in. Jared lunged forward with surprising speed, snatching the device off the quartz surface. He clutched the tablet tightly to his chest, shielding it. Mind your own business, DeAndre, Jared yelled, backing away. You do not know what you are looking at. That is a highly confidential client account. I cannot have you snooping around my proprietary data. DeAndre simply crossed his arms over his broad chest. His posture was immovable, projecting the undeniable authority of a man who spent his career dismantling financial lies. I know exactly what I'm looking at, Jared, DeAndre replied smoothly. That notification was a margin call liquidation warning. It means you leveraged assets you do not possess, and the exchange is about to wipe out your position unless you deposit emergency capital immediately. Capital you just admitted you do not have to bail out your mother. Where is the money, Jared? Where did you put the joint savings? Before Jared could formulate another lie, Rebecca stepped between them. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she held her hands up, shielding her brother from the questioning. What is wrong with you, DeAndre? Rebecca shrieked. My mother is sitting in a filthy jail cell right now because of this psychotic woman, and you are interrogating my brother about his brilliant investment strategies. You are supposed to be on our side. DeAndre looked down at his wife, his expression a mix of disappointment and exhaustion. "Rebecca," he said firmly, "your brother is lying about his finances. He cannot produce $5,000 for a bail bond, but he is receiving margin calls from shady cryptocurrency platforms. I am trying to figure out if he is in serious legal trouble." "Hi is a wealth manager," Rebecca snapped back, tossing her blonde hair defensively. "He makes more in a single month than you make in a year counting other people's money. Stop acting jealous just because you do not understand corporate finance. You are taking her side, aren't you? You are taking the side of the horrible woman who just had your mother-in-law arrested." Rebecca pointed a shaking finger directly at me. I stood silently near the shattered remains of my laptop, watching the toxic dynamic unfold. I did not need to say a single word to defend myself. DeAndre was doing the heavy lifting for me. He was effortlessly piercing through the fake facade of this family, and Rebecca was fighting tooth and nail to keep the comfortable illusion alive. I quietly noted the heavy, resigned sigh DeAndre let out. He looked at Jared, then at Rebecca, and finally he looked directly at me. In that brief, silent exchange of glances, a profound understanding passed between us. DeAndre knew something was terribly wrong here. He was not blinded by the toxic familial loyalty that infected the rest of them. I realized in that exact moment that DeAndre might be the only sane, rational person in this entire family. Sensing the walls closing in rapidly, Jared seized the chaotic opportunity his sister created. He puffed out his chest, using faux outrage to mask his suffocating financial panic. "I do not have to stand here and be interrogated in my own home," Jared announced loudly, grabbing his expensive suit jacket. "Especially not by a wife who calls the police on my mother, and a brother-in-law who openly disrespects my career." He marched toward the hallway closet, pulling out an overnight duffel bag. He aggressively threw random items inside, making as much noise as possible. "I am going to a hotel," Jared declared, zipping the bag shut with an angry pull. "I am not spending another single night under this roof until you learn your proper place as a wife, Lauren. You are going to drop the charges against my mother immediately. You are going to apologize to her, and you are going to beg me to come back home." Rebecca nodded vigorously, eagerly cheering on his manipulative display. "Good for you, Jared," she encouraged loudly. "Let her rot here. Come on, we will go figure out how to get Mom out of holding since these two are useless to us." Jared slung the heavy duffel bag over his shoulder and stormed out the front door without looking back once. Rebecca glared at DeAndre, shaking her head in disgust, before turning on her heel and following her brother out into the afternoon sun. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them. DeAndre remained standing in the kitchen, his broad shoulders slumped slightly as he stared at the empty space where his wife had just stood defending a liar. He looked over at me again, his dark eyes filled with unasked questions and professional alarm. I could tell he desperately wanted to ask me about the joint accounts, about the actual financial reality of my marriage. But the ringing silence of the house was abruptly shattered by a sharp, persistent buzzing. It was my phone vibrating violently against the smooth quartz countertop. I picked it up, expecting another unhinged text message from Rebecca or Jared. Instead, the screen displayed a high-priority encrypted alert from my secure corporate email server. The sender was the lead systems engineer at Apex Security. I opened the message, my eyes rapidly scanning the bold red text on the screen. My heart plummeted instantly into my stomach, and the air completely left my lungs. The shattered laptop resting on the floor was not just a piece of broken hardware. It was an active, secure node, and its sudden violent destruction had just triggered a catastrophic chain reaction in our most secure federal network. The catastrophic chain reaction in our federal network demanded my absolute attention for 14 grueling hours. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I sat in my home office using a backup secure terminal to coordinate with my incident response team. We worked through the night to isolate the compromised node, mitigate data corruption, and initiate the emergency protocols required by our service agreements. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, we had finally stabilized the immediate digital bleeding. But the financial liability of Barbara destroying that specific piece of hardware was astronomical. I finally allowed myself to step away from the monitors, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I walked into the kitchen, stepping carefully around the shattered plastic still resting on the hardwood floor. Before I could even pour a cup of coffee to revive myself, the sharp ring of the doorbell echoed through the silent house. I tightened the belt of my robe and walked to the foyer. A courier stood on the front porch holding a thick manila envelope attached to a digital clipboard. He verified my identity, handed me the heavy package, and required a signature for certified legal delivery. I closed the door and flipped the envelope over. The return address belonged to a law firm I had never heard of, a strip mall legal operation known for handling messy local disputes and bottom-feeder personal injury claims. I walked back to the kitchen island, sliced the seal open with a paring knife, and pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents. It was a formal demand letter heavily stamped with aggressive red ink. I read the first page and a harsh laugh escaped my throat. Jared and his mother Barbara had actually hired a remarkably sleazy lawyer to retaliate against me. The document was a masterclass in legal fiction and desperate extortion. The letter formally accused me of elder abuse, citing the incident where I allegedly laid hands on Barbara and forcefully evicted her from the property, intentionally causing her severe emotional and physical distress. The lawyer claimed my actions were a calculated attack on a fragile senior citizen. But the personal injury claim was just the appetizer. The real financial objective was buried deeply within the second section of the document. Jared, acting as the aggrieved husband, was officially demanding 50% ownership of Apex Security Limited Liability Company. The sleazy attorney argued that because the business grew significantly during our marriage, it should be legally classified as a shared marital asset, completely ignoring the ironclad structuring I had established years before Jared and I even went on our first date. The ultimatum was clear and aggressive. The letter demanded I transfer half of my corporate shares to Jared within 48 hours and immediately drop all criminal trespass charges against Barbara. If I refused to comply with these demands, the lawyer threatened to file an emergency injunction to freeze all of my personal and business bank accounts. They wanted to financially paralyze me, choking off my ability to run my company or pay my employees until I surrendered my equity to my parasitic husband. It was a blatant shakedown. Jared was drowning in massive offshore crypto debt, facing margin calls he could not cover, and he had decided the fastest way to save himself was to legally hijack the company I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I did not panic. I did not feel a single ounce of fear reading their ridiculous threats. I knew exactly how my corporate entity was structured. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct line of my corporate attorney, David. He was a highly skilled, high-powered legal strategist who handled corporate mergers and complex liability shields light years out of the league of the strip mall lawyer Jared had scraped together. David answered on the second ring. I quickly briefed him on the demand letter, the fabricated elder abuse claims, and the amateur threat to freeze the accounts of Apex Security. I expected David to laugh. I expected him to assure me that we could squash this pathetic demand letter with a single sharply worded response. Instead, a heavy, uncomfortable silence filled the phone line. When David finally spoke, his usually confident and rapid-fire voice was slow and deeply serious. Lauren, David said, the tone of his voice causing the hair on my arms to stand up. We can easily destroy this demand letter. The business accounts are secure. But I ran a routine sweep of your corporate property assets this morning after you emailed me about the hardware destruction last night. I needed to fully verify the structural insurance liabilities on the physical address. We have a much more immediate and severe problem on our hands right now. I gripped the phone tighter, my exhaustion instantly replaced by sharp adrenaline. What did you find, David? I asked. Lauren, he continued. I am looking at the county clerk registry for the property deed held by Apex Security. A secondary mortgage was executed against this property exactly 3 weeks ago. The loan was for $300,000, and the funds were dispersed immediately. I stared blindly at the shattered laptop still resting on my kitchen floor, my mind racing to comprehend his words. I never authorized a secondary mortgage, I stated flatly. I own this house outright. I know you did not, David replied, his voice grim. But the paperwork submitted to the lender contains your signature on the corporate authorization forms, alongside Jared acting as the brokering agent. Someone completely forged your exact signature, Lauren. Your husband just illegally leveraged your company headquarters to steal $300,000 in raw cash. This is no longer just a messy divorce or a petty family dispute over respect. He crossed a line into federal territory. We are dealing with massive bank fraud, and your husband is staring down the barrel of a very lengthy prison sentence. I did not hang up the phone. I clamped it between my ear and my shoulder, moving swiftly away from the kitchen island and straight into my home office. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my backup workstation. David, send me the exact filing number right now. I demanded, my voice stripped of all emotion. I needed to see the paperwork with my own eyes. Within seconds, a secure message popped up on my screen, containing the county clerk reference digits. I accessed the public property registry portal and punched in the numbers. The digital file loaded instantly. There it was. A secondary mortgage executed against the deed of Apex Security Limited Liability Company. The principal loan amount was an astounding $300,000. I scrolled past the standard boilerplate language straight to the signature pages. My blood ran completely cold. Staring back at me was a flawless replication of my signature. But it was not just a simple forgery on a dotted line. Jared had gone to terrifying lengths to bypass the stringent commercial lending protocols. He had fabricated entirely new operating agreements for my company. The fraudulent documents falsely listed him as a managing partner with full executive authority to encumber corporate assets. He utilized his official credentials as a licensed investment broker to fast-track the entire underwriting process, exploiting close professional relationships and completely abusing his fiduciary standing to bypass the standard notary verifications. I carefully zoomed in on the digital notary seal. It belonged to a junior associate at his brokerage firm, someone who likely rubber-stamped the paperwork as a favor without ever seeing me in person. Jared had orchestrated a highly sophisticated, premeditated financial crime right under my nose. He had effectively stolen $300,000 of equity from the fortress I had built to protect myself. David remained on the line, listening to the rapid clicking of my mouse. Lauren, this is textbook wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, David said gravely. The lender wired those funds directly into an account controlled solely by Jared. He used the United States financial system to execute a felony. This is no longer a civil dispute over marital assets or a petty argument about your mother-in-law. When the authorities investigate this, Jared is looking at mandatory federal prison time. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating the cold realization settling over me. The depth of his desperation was staggering. Draining our joint savings account of $120,000 was a profound betrayal, but this was a completely different magnitude of destruction. Jared had crossed the point of no return. I was drowning in his offshore crypto margin calls, and to save his own skin, he had actively chosen to sell me out. He weaponized his career, jeopardized his liberty, and violated the sanctity of my business. Do not contact his joke of a lawyer. I instructed David, my mind shifting from victim to tactician. Do not send a cease and desist. Do not tip them off that we know about the mortgage. I want you to compile a comprehensive fraud packet. Gather the authentic operating agreements. Pull the metadata showing my digital footprint during the time the fraudulent documents were supposedly signed, and draft a formal criminal referral. When we drop this hammer, I want Jared pinned to the floor with absolutely zero room to maneuver. Understood, David replied, the professional edge returning to his voice. I will have the fraud packet ready by tomorrow morning. Lock down your personal credit and initiate a hard freeze on all corporate lines immediately. I will handle the legal offensive. I ended the call with David and immediately initiated the security freezes. My fingers moved mechanically, executing the protective measures I had designed for my clients hundreds of times. But doing it for myself felt entirely different. It felt like armoring up for a war I never asked to fight, but one I absolutely intended to win. I walked back into the kitchen, my eyes drawn once again to the shattered remains of my primary laptop scattered across the hardwood floor. Barbara had smashed it in a fit of entitled rage, believing she was simply breaking a toy to teach me a lesson in domestic obedience. She thought she was establishing dominance. Jared thought he could use her fake emotional distress to extort me into dropping the trespassing charges. They were both playing checkers, while I was managing a highly volatile multi-million-dollar cybersecurity infrastructure. Suddenly, the sharp ring of my secure mobile device shattered the silence of the house. This was a dedicated, encrypted line strictly reserved for Tier 1 corporate emergencies. I checked the caller identification. It was the regional director of the largest national bank on the eastern seaboard, the absolute biggest and most lucrative client Apex Security possessed. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hair despite being alone, and answered the call. Lauren speaking, I said, maintaining a steady professional cadence. Lauren, the regional director, barked, his voice tight with barely contained panic. We have a massive situation. 5 minutes ago, our internal compliance dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The dedicated node you established for our network integration just went completely dark. It did not just log off, Lauren. The connection was violently severed, and the sudden termination corrupted the packet sequencing. I stared down at the broken plastic and exposed circuit boards of the laptop resting near my feet. The gravity of the situation hit me with the force of a freight train. That shattered machine on my floor was not just a standard workstation meant for answering simple daily emails. It was the active encrypted node conducting a live, highly classified federal security audit for the bank. Tell me the truth. Now. The voice of Director Thompson echoed from the speaker of my secure mobile device, vibrating with a level of stress I had rarely heard from a man who managed billions in institutional wealth. The sudden offline status of your dedicated node did not just trigger a localized warning, Lauren. The hard severing of the encrypted connection corrupted 3 full days of highly sensitive data processing. We were in the middle of executing the federal compliance stress test. The packet sequencing is completely shattered. Regulators are going to demand a full incident report by the end of the business day, and I need to know exactly what kind of cyber attack breached your perimeter. I stared down at the pieces of plastic and torn wires on my floor. There was no cyber attack, Director Thompson, I said, keeping my tone completely flat and devoid of panic. The perimeter of the network remains absolutely secure. The breach was entirely physical. Physical, Director Thompson barked, the confusion momentarily overriding his anger. What does that mean? Did someone breach your corporate headquarters? In a manner of speaking, yes, I replied. An unauthorized individual entered my workspace and intentionally destroyed the active hardware node. The device was physically smashed against the floor, instantly severing the connection and corrupting the active data stream. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the encrypted line. When Director Thompson finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Lauren, please tell me you have the perpetrator in custody. A breach of this magnitude during a live federal audit is not just a technical malfunction. It is a direct violation of our federal service level agreement. We are looking at massive compliance fines, lost operational hours, and severe data recovery protocols. Whoever did this just committed a major federal offense. I walked over to my desk and picked up the physical copy of the police report the responding officers had provided before taking Barbara away in handcuffs. The perpetrator was arrested on the scene by local law enforcement, I explained smoothly. She was taken into custody for trespassing and felony destruction of property. I am currently holding the official police incident report, which includes witness statements and badge numbers of the arresting officers. I will scan and transmit this documentation to your secure inbox immediately, along with the case number so your legal team can verify the details. Who was it? Director Thompson demanded. Corporate espionage. A disgruntled former employee. I took a slow, steady breath. No, it was my mother-in-law. She was throwing a tantrum because I refused to stop my work to clean the house and cater to her son. She ripped the power cord from the wall and slammed the machine onto the hardwood floor to teach me a lesson in domestic obedience. I could practically hear the gears grinding to a halt in Director Thompson's brain. The sheer absurdity of the situation clashed violently with the extreme federal consequences of the act. Your mother-in-law, he repeated, sounding as if he were trying to process an alien language. A domestic dispute just corrupted a Tier 1 federal financial audit. She believed she was breaking a simple personal computer to punish a disobedient wife, I clarified. She lacked the intellectual capacity to understand she was actually committing corporate sabotage against a partnered vendor of a national bank. However, her ignorance of the hardware's function does not mitigate the damage she intentionally caused. I am forwarding the police report to you right now. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my backup terminal, attaching the digitized police report to a highly encrypted email. I hit send and watched the confirmation flash on the screen. The documentation is in your inbox, Director Thompson. You have the full legal name of the perpetrator, the arrest record, and the confirmation that the destruction was a malicious, intentional act. Apex Security will fully cooperate with your incident response team to reconstruct the corrupted data packets, but the liability for this breach rests entirely on the individual who committed the physical sabotage. I heard the clicking of a keyboard through the speaker as Director Thompson opened the file. Okay, he said, his tone shifting from frantic management to ruthless corporate administration. I see the report. I am forwarding this directly to our risk management division and our primary insurance carriers. Lauren, you need to understand the gravity of what is about to happen. Because this was an intentional act of destruction disrupting a federally mandated process, our insurance providers will not simply write this off as an accident. They will pursue the individual responsible for every single cent of the damages incurred. I understand completely, I replied, staring at the ruined node. That is exactly why I ensured she was formally arrested and charged on the scene. I am insulating my company and your bank from her reckless actions. Good, Director Thompson said firmly. Keep your backup systems online. We will deploy the recovery protocols within the hour. Expect to hear from our legal and insurance adjusters very soon. They will need to calculate the exact financial impact of the corrupted data, the delayed compliance filing, and the emergency recovery operations. The call ended, leaving me in the quiet of my home office. I walked back into the kitchen and carefully picked up the shattered pieces of the laptop, placing them into a secure evidence bag. Barbara thought she was putting me in my place. She thought she was proving that her son was the only one doing important work. She had absolutely no concept of the firestorm she had just ignited. Less than 4 hours later, my secure phone rang again. This time it was not Director Thompson. It was a senior claims adjuster from the elite insurance firm that underwrote the bank's operational liabilities. The adjuster was a woman who spoke with the cold, precise efficiency of someone who spent her life quantifying corporate disasters. Lauren, the adjuster, stated smoothly. We have completed the preliminary assessment of the network disruption caused by the physical destruction of your node. We have factored in the cost of the hardware the specialized data recovery teams required to reconstruct the shattered packet, sequencing the operational downtime of the bank's compliance division, and the impending federal penalties for missing the audit deadline. I listened intently, my pulse steady. I knew the numbers would be high, but I needed the official calculation. Because the destruction was a deliberate, malicious act, documented by law enforcement. The adjuster continued. Our firm is formally classifying this incident as an act of corporate sabotage. We will be initiating a targeted subrogation claim directly against the arrested individual, Barbara, for the full extent of the damages. And what is the total liability calculation? I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the empty kitchen. The adjuster paused for a fraction of a second, ensuring the number carried its full devastating weight. We are finalizing the paperwork now. The total financial liability for the sabotage is currently assessed at $2.5 million. I thanked the adjuster, ended the call, and set the secure mobile device down on my desk. $2.5 million. I let the number wash over me, feeling the immense, crushing weight of it. For a brief second, I pictured Barbara sitting in her holding cell, completely oblivious to the fact that her temper tantrum had just cost her more money than she or her golden child son would ever see in a lifetime. She thought she was teaching me a lesson about domestic obedience. Instead, she had just handed me the ultimate weapon to dismantle their entire toxic existence. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed David again. My corporate attorney answered with his usual brisk efficiency. I relayed the final assessment from the insurance adjuster and instructed him on our next move. We were not going to wait for Jared and his strip mall lawyer to make good on their pathetic threats. We were going to strike first, and we were going to strike with overwhelming, undeniable force. Draft a formal response to the demand letter we received this morning. I instructed David, pacing the length of my home office. I want you to outline the exact nature of the hardware Barbara destroyed. Do not leave out a single detail. Specify that it was an active encrypted node conducting a live federal security audit for a national bank. Then attach the official insurance liability assessment for $2.5 million. David chuckled, a dark professional sound of approval. I will make sure the language is exceptionally clear, Lauren. I will also explicitly state that because the destruction interrupted a federally mandated financial compliance process, the bank is legally obligated to report the incident to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Interfering with a federal bank audit is a serious cybercrime matter. We are not just talking about civil damages anymore. We are talking about a potential federal indictment for corporate sabotage. Have it delivered by specialized courier by noon today, I said. Send copies directly to the strip mall lawyer, to Jared at his hotel, and to Barbara at whatever address she crawls back to once she posts bail. I want them all to receive it at the exact same moment. The execution was flawless. At precisely 12:15 in the afternoon, my phone began to light up. It started with a single phone call from Jared. I watched his name flash across the screen, the device vibrating silently against the polished wood of my desk. I did not answer. 10 seconds later, he called again. Then again. Within 5 minutes, I had 8 missed calls. When he realized I was not going to pick up, the text messages started pouring in. The rapid-fire texts were a masterclass in panic and manipulation. The arrogant, demanding tone he had used just yesterday when he told me to learn my place as a wife was completely gone. In its place was the desperate, frantic pleading of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the tracks with a freight train bearing down on him. Lauren, please pick up the phone, the first text read. This is out of control. We need to talk about this letter right now. I watched the screen as the typing bubble appeared and disappeared rapidly. He was unraveling. $2.5 million, Lauren, you cannot be serious. It was just a computer. Tell them it was an accident. You have to tell the bank it was an accident. My mother does not have that kind of money. I do not have that kind of money. They are going to ruin us. I read the words with cold satisfaction. He was finally understanding the magnitude of his situation. He was already drowning in his hidden offshore crypto debts, facing margin calls he could not cover, and now he was suddenly legally tethered to a multi-million-dollar corporate liability claim. His entire financial house of cards was collapsing simultaneously. But Jared, true to his toxic nature, could not simply take responsibility. The gaslighting attempts immediately followed the panic. Lauren, you are taking this way too far. He texted, the desperation practically dripping from the words. You are being vindictive over a stupid argument. We are family. Family does not involve the feds. You cannot let them call the FBI on my mother. She is an old woman. You are going to send her to federal prison over a domestic dispute. Please just answer the phone so we can fix this privately. I am sorry about the fight this morning. Just call me back. I was trying to shrink the massive federal crime into a petty domestic dispute. He wanted to fix it privately because the spotlight of a federal investigation would instantly expose his forged secondary mortgage and his drained joint accounts. He was terrified that if the FBI started looking into Barbara's sabotage, they would inevitably uncover his own massive wire fraud. I placed my phone face down on the desk, completely ignoring his pathetic pleas. Let him sweat. Let him sit in his cheap hotel room and realize that the woman he thought he could control held the absolute power to dismantle his entire life. I turned my attention back to my backup terminal, ready to review the latest packet sequencing reports from my incident response team. As my fingers touched the keyboard, a notification chimed softly from the corner of my monitor. It was not an email from my engineers, and it was not another frantic text from Jared. It was a direct message notification from LinkedIn. I frowned, opening a new tab and navigating to the professional networking site. The message was from DeAndre. I stared at his name, remembering the profound look of understanding we had shared in my kitchen yesterday. DeAndre had seen the offshore crypto margin call on Jared's iPad. He knew Jared was lying about his wealth, and as a forensic accountant, he knew exactly what those lies usually meant. I clicked the message icon, opening the secure chat window. The text was brief, precise, and carried an undeniable sense of urgency. Lauren, the message read, "We need to talk, off the record. Bring Jared's financial statements." I replied with a single word. Yes. We agreed to meet an hour later at a small independent coffee shop located on the ground floor of an obscure commercial building in the downtown financial district. It was miles away from the manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood, and far from the upscale restaurants where Rebecca and Barbara spent their afternoons socializing. It was neutral ground. It was secure and perfectly anonymous. I gathered the heavy black letter containing the joint bank statements, the forged secondary mortgage paperwork, and the corporate operating agreements for Apex Security. I placed everything into a nondescript leather briefcase and drove downtown. When I arrived at this coffee shop, DeAndre was already sitting in a dimly lit corner booth facing the entrance. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, looking every bit the ruthless forensic auditor he was. There was no coffee in front of him. I was not here to socialize. As I slid into the booth opposite him, he did not offer a polite greeting or ask how I was holding up after the explosive events of the past 24 hours. DeAndre operated on cold, hard data, and right now his entire world was tilting off its axis. "I saw the notification on his tablet yesterday." DeAndre began, his deep voice barely rising above a whisper. "I know you saw me looking at it, Lauren. It was a margin call liquidation warning from a platform called Zenith Offshore. Have you ever heard of it?" I shook my head, keeping my hands folded over my leather briefcase. "Jared told me he moved our entire joint savings of $120,000 into a highly exclusive closed offshore investment fund to protect our assets from my supposedly volatile business," I replied smoothly. DeAndre let out a harsh, bitter breath. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the wooden table. "There is no exclusive closed fund, Lauren. When I left your house yesterday, I went straight to my office and ran a quiet background check on Zenith Offshore, using my firm's investigative software. It is not a legitimate wealth management platform. It is a notorious unregulated cryptocurrency exchange based in the Bahamas. And worse than that, it is currently flagged by multiple international financial watchdogs as a massive Ponzi scheme." I absorbed the information, feeling the last remaining pieces of Jared's facade crumble into dust. "How bad is it?" I asked. DeAndre looked at me with grim, absolute certainty. "It is a total wipeout. The platform lures arrogant amateur investors by promising guaranteed astronomical returns on highly leveraged crypto trades. When the market inevitably dips, the platform issues immediate margin calls. If the investor cannot deposit massive amounts of emergency capital within hours, the exchange liquidates their entire portfolio and steals whatever initial capital they invested. Jared did not just lose your joint savings, Lauren. He dumped it into a black hole, borrowed against it on margin, and got completely liquidated. He has absolutely nothing left. He is mathematically at zero." I nodded slowly. The financial destruction DeAndre described perfectly explained the sheer unhinged panic Jared had displayed in my kitchen. It explained why he desperately needed me to sell my corporate shares just to cover a pathetic $5,000 bail bond for his mother. "I know he is at zero, DeAndre," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But losing our joint savings is not the reason I agreed to meet you today. The situation has escalated far beyond a simple bad investment or a drained bank account. Jared has crossed a line that leads directly to a federal penitentiary." I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of documents my corporate attorney had compiled. I slid the manila folder across the table. DeAndre opened it, his professional eyes immediately scanning the top page. "This is a secondary mortgage agreement," DeAndre stated, his brow furrowing in confusion. "For $300,000. It is secured against the physical property of your business headquarters." I leaned back in the booth. "Yes. Except I never authorized that mortgage. I own Apex Security outright, and Jared has absolutely zero legal equity in my company. In order to secure that $300,000 cash injection to feed his collapsing crypto scam, Jared fabricated entirely new corporate operating agreements. He falsely listed himself as a managing partner with executive authority. Then he used his professional credentials as a licensed investment broker to bypass the standard underwriting verifications. He completely forged my signature on every single page of that document." DeAndre went perfectly still. The air in the quiet coffee shop seemed to freeze as the magnitude of the crime washed over him. As a forensic accountant, DeAndre dealt with financial discrepancies every single day. But seeing his own brother-in-law commit blatant aggravated identity theft and felony wire fraud was a completely different reality. He traced his finger over the flawless forgery of my signature, his jaw clenching tightly. "This is federal bank fraud," Lauren DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly register. "He used the United States financial system to execute a felony. If the lender finds out, or if you report this, the FBI will tear his life apart. He will face mandatory minimums in a federal cell. I have already initiated the criminal referral through my corporate attorney," I informed him without a single ounce of hesitation. Jared decided to weaponize his career to sell me out. I am simply letting the federal consequences of his actions run their natural course. I brought this to you because you are the only sane person in that family. I wanted you to see the unvarnished truth before the fallout destroys the illusion your wife clings to. DeAndre did not argue. He did not ask me to spare his brother-in-law. He simply flipped to the second page of the mortgage document, his eyes automatically tracking the disbursement details of the $300,000 loan. His forensic brain naturally sought the destination of the illicit funds. He followed the trail of the money, reading the banking routing numbers listed for the immediate wire transfer. Suddenly, DeAndre stopped breathing. I watched the blood completely drain from his face, leaving an ashen, horrified pallor in its wake. His broad shoulders stiffened so violently that the table shook. He stared at the 9-digit routing number and the corresponding account identifier printed on the bank disbursement authorization. "DeAndre," I asked, leaning forward slightly, "what is it?" He did not answer right away. His hands began to shake, a fine, barely perceptible tremor that betrayed a sudden and absolute devastation. He slowly raised his eyes from the paper to look at me. The professional detachment of the auditor was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying quiet rage of a protective father. "Lauren," DeAndre whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying realization. "Jared did not just forge your signature to steal $300,000. He needed a clean, established financial vehicle to receive the wired funds from the lender before routing them to the Bahamas. He could not use his own personal accounts because his risk profile at his brokerage firm would flag a sudden massive cash injection." DeAndre tapped a shaking finger directly onto the account number listed on the document. "He routed the illicit funds through a highly secure trust account. I recognize these routing digits because I personally set this account up 5 years ago." I stared at him, the horrifying truth beginning to form in my mind. "Whose trust account is it, DeAndre?" DeAndre looked me dead in the eye, his face contorting into a mask of pure, devastating fury. "It is the college trust fund that belongs to my 5-year-old son." I watched the absolute devastation wash over DeAndre. The silent, suffocating realization that his own brother-in-law had not just committed federal bank fraud, but had actively chosen to use his innocent 5-year-old nephew as a money laundering shield. The betrayal was so profound that it seemed to pull the oxygen straight out of the coffee shop. DeAndre closed his eyes and took a long, measured breath. When he opened them again, the warm, supportive brother-in-law was gone. In his place sat a ruthless forensic auditor who had just made it his personal mission to destroy the man who put his son in legal jeopardy. "Do what you have to do," Lauren DeAndre said, his voice completely devoid of mercy. "Send the fraud packet to the authorities. Do not hold anything back. I am going to return to my office and pull every single transaction record associated with my son's trust." Jared had to have forged Rebecca's signature to authorize the routing of those illicit funds. I am going to build a financial paper trail so airtight that Jared will never see the outside of a federal penitentiary. We stood up from the booth and parted ways with a silent nod of mutual understanding. We were no longer just in-laws dealing with family drama. We were two professionals coordinating a tactical strike against a massive financial threat. I drove back to my house feeling a renewed sense of absolute clarity. The pieces were all falling perfectly into place. However, while DeAndre and I were meticulously preparing a federal case, his wife was busy living in a completely different reality. Completely ignorant of the impending legal doom hovering over her golden child brother and her abusive mother, Rebecca decided to wage a war on the only battlefield she actually understood: social media. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my personal cell phone was vibrating so violently against the center console that it was physically hot to the touch. I picked up the device and saw hundreds of notifications flooding my lock screen. Missed calls from unknown numbers, text messages from distant relatives I had not spoken to in years, and a torrential downpour of alerts from Facebook and Instagram. I parked the car in the garage and opened the Instagram application. Right at the top of my feed was a 20-minute live video posted by Rebecca. It had already amassed thousands of views and hundreds of comments. I tapped the screen and watched as my sister-in-law delivered the performance of a lifetime. She was sitting in her pristine suburban kitchen, wearing zero makeup and intentionally looking as disheveled as possible. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands, staring into the camera with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Rebecca sobbed to her followers, wiping away a perfectly timed tear. "But I have to speak out to protect my family. My brother Jared is married to a manipulative, calculating gold digger. For years we welcomed Lauren into our home with open arms, but she has done nothing but try to destroy us from the inside out." I watched in cold fascination as Rebecca completely rewrote history. She painted me as a lazy, parasitic wife who sat around all day draining her hardworking brother's bank accounts. She claimed that Jared was suffering from severe clinical depression because of my constant financial demands and emotional abuse. But the most unhinged part of her broadcast was how she framed the arrest of her mother. "My sweet elderly mother just wanted to help Lauren clean her house," Rebecca cried, clutching her chest dramatically. And Lauren violently attacked her. She framed my mother for property damage and had her dragged out of her own son's house in handcuffs just to be cruel. Now she is trying to steal my brother's business assets to fund her lavish lifestyle. Please share this video. People need to know exactly what kind of monster Lauren truly is. The video was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood, and the internet absolutely devoured it. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of misplaced righteous indignation. Rebecca had successfully unleashed a horde of flying monkeys. Jared's former fraternity brothers left vulgar, threatening remarks demanding I give Jared his money back. Distant aunts and uncles posted long paragraphs about how I was a disgrace to the institution of marriage. Local suburban moms from Rebecca's Country Club echoed the outrage, tagging my corporate business page and leaving fraudulent one-star reviews, claiming my cybersecurity firm was a front for a scam artist. The digital harassment quickly spilled over into the physical world. My phone rang incessantly with anonymous voicemails, filled with heavy breathing and aggressive slurs, calling me a thief and a gold digger. I ignored every single one. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a glass of ice water, feeling incredibly calm. I decided to step out onto the front porch to clear my head and check the Daily Mail. As I opened the heavy oak front door, I immediately noticed the debris scattered across the manicured lawn. I walked down the paved driveway and stopped dead in my tracks. My large, secure mailbox had been violently bashed in, completely caved in on one side by what looked like a heavy baseball bat. The metal was twisted and ruined. Sprayed across the side of the destroyed mailbox in bright, jagged red paint were two words: gold digger. Someone in the neighborhood, or perhaps one of Jared's aggressive friends, had seen Rebecca's video and decided to take real-world action. They wanted me to feel scared. They wanted me to feel isolated, hated, and utterly defeated. They expected me to break down crying or retaliate with my own angry, emotional social media post. I did neither. I did not shed a single tear, and I did not post a single word online defending myself. Retaliating on social media is what amateurs do. I was a cybersecurity chief executive officer, and data was my weapon of choice. I walked back into my home office and booted up my secure terminal. I utilized specialized forensic software to capture and archive every single piece of digital evidence. I recorded pristine, high-definition copies of Rebecca's live video. I captured the metadata and timestamps of every threatening comment. I traced the IP addresses of the most aggressive accounts attempting to review bomb my business page. I downloaded the horrific voicemails and converted them into crystal clear audio files. I walked outside and took high-resolution photographs of the vandalized mailbox from multiple angles, documenting the exact nature of the physical intimidation. I compiled everything into a meticulously organized encrypted digital dossier. Every lie, every threat, every single piece of defamation was perfectly categorized and legally preserved. I opened a new email drafting a message to David, my high-powered corporate attorney. I attached the massive dossier to the secure server link. I typed a single concise instruction in the body of the email. David, review the attached files. Jared and Barbara are not the only ones who need to face absolute ruin. Please draft a massive comprehensive defamation and libel lawsuit against Rebecca. Add it to the pile. I closed my email client. The digital war was safely contained within the legal boundaries my attorney would enforce. But the physical world was already eager to punish the villain Rebecca had painted. The next morning, a bright orange envelope was taped to my freshly damaged mailbox. It was a formal citation from the Community Homeowners Association. It was signed by Patricia, the HOA president, a woman who played tennis with Barbara and treated her position like a dictatorship. Spurred by the smear campaign Rebecca launched, Patricia decided to personally drive me out of the neighborhood. The citation aggressively claimed that my residence was illegally operating as a commercial business hub. It imposed a $5,000 fine for creating a public disturbance and demanded an emergency community vote to evict Apex Security within 30 days. Patricia wanted to make a public spectacle out of me. She wanted to humiliate the daughter-in-law who dared to have Barbara arrested. She thought I would simply pack my bags and flee under the weight of suburban peer pressure. I did not pack my bags. I called David. I told him we had an emergency community board meeting on Thursday evening, and I needed him to bring the original neighborhood bylaws. When Thursday arrived, the community clubhouse was thick with manufactured outrage. The room was packed with residents who had seen Rebecca crying on Instagram. They sat in folding chairs glaring at me as I walked down the center aisle, whispering and calling me a criminal. I kept my head high, my expression completely neutral, walking in perfect tandem with David, who carried a sleek leather briefcase. Patricia sat at the head table flanked by two other board members. She wore a smug smile, banging a wooden gavel on the table to call the room to order, her eyes locked onto me. "We are gathered here to address a severe violation of our community standards," Patricia announced into the microphone. "A resident has brought a dangerous element into our neighborhood. She has subjected us to police sirens, vandalism, and the unauthorized operation of a commercial enterprise. We will be voting tonight to formally evict this business and place a lien on the property until all disturbance fines are paid in full." David did not wait for her to finish her grand speech. He stepped forward and dropped a thick stack of printed documents onto the board table directly in front of Patricia. I stepped up beside him. "Patricia," I said, projecting my voice across the clubhouse, "before you attempt to illegally evict my company and expose this entire board to a massive civil rights lawsuit, I highly recommend you read Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the community bylaws you are supposedly enforcing tonight." Patricia scowled, looking at the highlighted paper. "The bylaws state that commercial businesses are prohibited from residential homes only if they generate physical retail foot traffic, require commercial zoning permits, or utilize community roads for commercial freight delivery. I run a boutique cybersecurity firm. My entire infrastructure consists of encrypted servers and remote digital access. I do not have a storefront. I do not have retail customers parking on the street. I operate a legally protected home office, which is entirely compliant with both state law and your own neighborhood guidelines. You have absolutely zero legal standing to fine me or evict my company." Patricia flushed a deep, angry red. She slammed her hand down on the table, refusing to lose face in front of her friends. "Do not try to use legal loopholes with me, Lauren," she snapped. "You had a police cruiser flashing its lights in my neighborhood, and a woman dragged out in handcuffs. You are attracting suspicious financial activity to this community, and we have the right to protect our property values from your shady operations. We are holding the eviction vote anyway." I leaned forward, resting both hands on the table, closing the distance. My voice dropped to a quiet razor-sharp whisper that only the board members could hear over the murmuring crowd. Patricia, I said smoothly, you want to talk about suspicious financial activity. You might want to ask your good friend Barbara where her son has been hiding. Because 3 weeks ago, Jared committed felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft by forging my signature to illegally leverage a secondary mortgage on this exact property to cover his offshore cryptocurrency debts. Patricia froze, her eyes widening in sudden horror as the word felony registered in her brain. I continued, my gaze locked onto hers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently preparing to intervene regarding a $2.5 million corporate sabotage claim involving your tennis partner, Barbara. Now, if you proceed with this illegal eviction vote and actively attempt to interfere with the corporate ownership of a property that is currently the center of an active federal bank fraud investigation, my attorney will ensure that this entire board is subpoenaed as willing accomplices attempting to obstruct a federal inquiry. Do you really want to drag this entire neighborhood into a federal criminal trial just to defend a man who steals from his own family? All the color drained from the face of Patricia. The smug, victorious glow vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked at David, who offered her a cold, confirming nod. She looked back at me, realizing she had unknowingly stepped onto an active legal landmine that could detonate her entire life. Patricia swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached for her wooden gavel. Without offering a single word of explanation to the confused, angry crowd of neighbors waiting for a show, she banged the gavel against the table. This meeting is immediately adjourned. Patricia choked out, her voice cracking. All fines are rescinded. The board will not be pursuing any action against Apex Security. Have a good evening. She stood up and sprinted toward the back exit, leaving the room in completely stunned silence. The community clubhouse remained frozen in confusion as I turned and walked out the double doors with David right beside me. We had successfully neutralized the suburban uprising, leaving the neighborhood gossips to feed on their own manufactured drama. The crisp autumn air felt incredibly refreshing as we walked back to my car. We had won the battle of the suburbs, but the actual war was just entering its final, most devastating phase. The weeks leading up to the Thanksgiving holiday were a masterclass in sheer delusion from my estranged husband and his mother. After the spectacular failure of their demand letter and the sudden collapse of their homeowner association eviction plot, Jared and Barbara completely vanished into their own carefully curated echo chamber. They ceased all direct communication with me. No texts, no calls, no further legal threats from their strip mall attorney. They were adopting a strategy of aggressive denial, foolishly believing that if they simply ignored the massive federal and financial liabilities bearing down on them, the problems would magically disappear. Instead of dealing with reality, they doubled down on their favorite coping mechanism, which was projecting an image of absolute perfection and wealth to anyone who would look. Thanksgiving was their grand stage. According to the daily onslaught of social media updates I monitored from a burner account, Barbara was hosting a massive, lavish holiday dinner at her upscale home. She had invited dozens of extended family members, distant cousins, and wealthy family friends. The guest list was meticulously designed to create a sympathetic audience for their fabricated victimhood narrative. Rebecca was the primary broadcaster of this delusional pageant. She posted endless photos of elaborate floral centerpieces, catered silver platters, and crystal wine glasses. Her captions were thinly veiled attacks aimed directly at me, praising her family for standing strong against toxic outsiders and celebrating their unbreakable bond in the face of my supposed greed and mental instability. They were actively using the holiday of gratitude as a public relations campaign to bash me to the entire bloodline, solidifying their status as the innocent, persecuted victims of a psychotic daughter-in-law. I was naturally uninvited. The invitation was explicitly revoked in a passive-aggressive email sent by Rebecca weeks prior, stating that my dark energy was not welcome at their table of blessings. I had laughed when I read it, happily accepting the exclusion. I had absolutely no desire to sit around eating dry turkey while listening to Jared brag about his non-existent investment portfolios. However, my plans for a quiet, peaceful holiday at home were abruptly altered 3 days before Thanksgiving. I received an encrypted message from DeAndre. Since our secret meeting at the coffee shop, DeAndre had been living behind enemy lines. He maintained a stoic, neutral facade at home, with Rebecca playing the part of the supportive husband, while secretly utilizing his forensic accounting expertise to trace every single digital penny Jared had stolen. DeAndre was a man possessed. The theft of his young son's college trust fund had ignited a cold, calculated fury inside him that demanded absolute, undeniable justice. DeAndre called me on a secure line that evening. His voice was a low, steady rumble of suppressed rage. "Lauren, the audit is complete." DeAndre informed me, his tone strictly professional but carrying a lethal edge. "I have mapped the entire financial trajectory. I have the routing numbers, the forged authorizations, and the exact timestamps showing when Jared transferred the stolen equity from your mortgage directly into my son's trust, and then immediately wired it offshore to cover his crypto margin calls. The paper trail is completely bulletproof." He left a digital footprint a mile wide. "That is excellent work, DeAndre," I replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "My corporate attorney has also finalized the federal fraud packet. The Federal Bureau of Investigation criminal referral is primed and ready for submission. We just received the official subrogation lawsuit from the bank's insurance carrier regarding Barbara's little hardware destruction stunt. The final liability assessment stands firmly at $2.5 million, and it is holding her personally and solely responsible." DeAndre let out a sharp, decisive breath. "They are hosting a massive Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday," he stated. "The entire extended family will be there, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone who has been eagerly eating up Rebecca's lies on social media. They think they have won, Lauren. They think they have successfully isolated you and protected their golden boy. I cannot sit at that table and break bread with a man who stole my son's future. I want to burn their facade to the ground, and I want to do it in front of every single person they are trying to impress." I smiled, the plan instantly forming in my mind. "You want to crash Thanksgiving?" I said, a statement rather than a question. "I want to deliver the consequences in person," DeAndre confirmed. "I want you there. Bring the insurance claim. Bring the federal referral. I will bring the forensic audit. We walk in together, and we do not leave until the truth is resting on their pristine dining room table." The sheer tactical brilliance of the plan was undeniable. Confronting them in private would only result in more gaslighting, denial, and manipulation. Confronting them in front of the very audience they were trying to manipulate would strip them of their only remaining weapon, their reputation. Thursday afternoon arrived with crisp, biting cold air. I dressed meticulously, opting for a sharp, tailored black suit that projected absolute corporate authority. I was not dressing for a family dinner. I was dressing for a corporate execution. I gathered the heavy, devastating files from my desk. I slid the glossy red stamped insurance lawsuit into a premium leather portfolio. Beside it, I placed the thick, undeniable FBI wire fraud referral. I made sure every page was perfectly aligned, ensuring the visual impact of the documents matched their legal weight. I drove across town to a commercial parking lot situated just 2 blocks outside of Barbara's exclusive gated community. DeAndre was already there, waiting in his black sport utility vehicle. He stepped out as I pulled up, wearing a dark, perfectly fitted suit. He held a thick, spiral-bound ledger in his right hand. The forensic audit. The financial nail in the coffin. We did not exchange pleasantries. We did not need to. We shared a single resolute nod. We walked side by side down the suburban sidewalk, our footsteps echoing in sync against the pavement. From a block away, I could already hear the loud, arrogant laughter spilling from the brightly lit house at the end of the cul-de-sac. We moved purposefully toward the grand structure, carrying the absolute destruction of their perfect family illusion directly to their front door. We stepped onto the pristine wraparound porch of the sprawling suburban estate. The front door was slightly ajar, inviting the crisp autumn breeze inside, alongside the loud, booming sounds of a dozen overlapping conversations. The rich aroma of roasted turkey and expensive wine wafted through the entryway. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy wooden door wide open and stepped onto the polished marble foyer with DeAndre right beside me. We walked purposefully through the hallway, moving past the meticulously arranged family portraits that showcased their fabricated reality. Laughter echoed from the formal dining room at the back of the house. I gripped my leather portfolio tightly, feeling the deeply satisfying weight of the federal fraud referral and the insurance liability lawsuit resting inside. We turned the corner and walked straight into the packed dining room. The space was a spectacle of suburban excess. A massive dining table stretched elegantly across the entire room, groaning under the immense weight of polished silver platters, expensive crystal decanters, and perfectly arranged seasonal centerpieces. Exactly 20 extended family members were seated around the massive feast, happily clinking wine glasses. Jared sat at the head of the table, soaking in the admiration of his aunts and uncles. Barbara sat to his right, wearing a cashmere sweater and a smug expression. Rebecca was busy snapping photos on her smartphone for her digital audience. The moment my heels clicked against the threshold, someone gasped. An absolute suffocating silence fell over the room. The laughter died instantly. Forks clattered awkwardly against porcelain plates. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto me, wide with shock. They had spent weeks consuming a narrative where I was an unstable, psychotic gold digger, rightfully banished from their inner circle. Seeing me stand there dressed in a sharp black suit and projecting corporate authority completely shattered the fragile illusion they had been fed. Barbara was the first to react. Her face turned an ugly shade of crimson as shock gave way to explosive rage. "What are you doing in my house?" Barbara screamed, slamming her wine glass down onto the table. "Get out right now. You are not welcome here. You are a criminal who attacks the elderly. I am calling the police." She pointed a shaking finger at the door, looking wildly around the table to rally the family. The relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the perfect dinner descended into absolute chaos. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood my ground, my eyes locked onto Barbara and her fake outrage. "I have some very important documents that require your immediate legal signature," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension of the room like a razor blade. Jared slammed his hands on the table and shoved his chair back. He marched toward me, his chest puffed out, eager to play the dominant alpha male in front of his captive audience. He thought he could use physical presence to intimidate me into retreating. "You heard my mother," Lauren. Jared barked, his face twisting into a sneer. "You do not belong here. You lost the right to sit at this table. Turn around and walk out that door right now, or I am going to physically throw you out onto the street myself." I took another aggressive step forward, raising his hands to grab my shoulders. He never made contact. DeAndre stepped smoothly out from behind me, moving with terrifying speed. The forensic accountant inserted himself directly between Jared and me, forming an impenetrable barricade. DeAndre did not raise his hands. He did not need to. His sheer physical presence combined with his icy demeanor froze Jared dead in his tracks. Jared stumbled backward, his arrogant bravado evaporating the second he realized he was facing his formidable brother-in-law. DeAndre. Jared stammered, his eyes darting frantically between me and the man he thought was his ally. "What are you doing? Tell this crazy woman to leave. She is ruining Thanksgiving." DeAndre looked down at Jared with absolute disgust. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the respected accountant to restore order to the family holiday. Instead, DeAndre delivered a sentence that sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. "She stays," DeAndre said, his deep, resonant voice echoing off the walls. "Because if she leaves, the police waiting down the street come in." A collective gasp ripped through the relatives. Barbara clutched her chest, going completely pale. The mention of police waiting down the street triggered a primal panic inside Jared. He knew exactly what he had done. He knew about the forged signature, the secondary mortgage, and the drained bank accounts. His eyes darted nervously toward the front windows, expecting to see flashing red and blue lights tearing through his sanctuary. Rebecca slammed her phone face down on the table, her curated reality completely shattered by her own husband. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "DeAndre, what is wrong with you?" Rebecca shrieked, her voice shrill with betrayal. "Why did you bring her here? Why are you defending this toxic woman? She had our mother arrested. She is trying to steal my brother's money. You are supposed to be protecting our family." DeAndre turned his cold, analytical gaze slowly toward his wife. He did not yell. He did not engage in her hysterical theatrics. He simply reached his hand into the deep leather messenger bag slung across his broad chest. "I am protecting our family," Rebecca DeAndre stated, his tone completely devoid of any marital warmth. "But you are desperately defending a parasitic criminal." With a swift motion, DeAndre pulled out a massive binder bound in heavy black plastic. It contained hundreds of pages of bank routing numbers, wire transfer receipts, margin call warnings, and forensic summaries. He raised the heavy binder high above the meticulously decorated table. Then, with devastating finality, DeAndre dropped the massive financial dossier directly onto the center of the roasted Thanksgiving turkey. The heavy black plastic binder landed with a wet, sickening thud right in the middle of the perfectly roasted Thanksgiving turkey. Gravy splashed across the pristine white linen tablecloth, staining the crystal wine glasses and ruining the meticulously curated holiday aesthetic. Several aunts shrieked, pulling their chairs back as the juices dripped onto their laps. The shock in the room was absolute. Nobody moved to salvage the dinner. All eyes were glued to the massive stack of financial ruin resting on the main course. DeAndre stood tall at the end of the table, his posture radiating unyielding authority. He did not look at the ruined food. He looked directly at the 20 extended family members who had spent the last 2 hours eating up the lies of his brother-in-law. "For years," DeAndre began, his voice projecting clearly across the silent dining room, "this family has worshipped Jared as the golden standard of financial success. You have praised his investments, admired his luxury cars, and applauded his career as an elite wealth manager. You have also spent the last 3 weeks listening to Rebecca and Barbara assassinate the character of a woman who actually built her own successful enterprise from nothing. It is time for a forensic reality check." Jared scrambled to his feet, his face alternating between chalk white and furious red. He grabbed a cloth napkin and aggressively wiped a speck of gravy from his expensive suit jacket, attempting to regain a shred of his arrogant composure. "This is completely out of line." Jared laughed, though the sound was hollow and frantic. "You are making a massive scene over a temporary liquidity issue. The markets are highly volatile right now, and I simply executed a few leveraged positions to maximize our portfolio growth. It is a standard institutional strategy. You are a basic accountant, so I do not expect you to understand high-level wealth generation." DeAndre did not even blink at the insult. He reached forward, flipping open the heavy cover of the binder resting on the turkey. "A temporary liquidity issue," DeAndre echoed, tapping a thick red highlighted document on the very first page. "A liquidity issue is when you wait 3 days for a standard stock dividend to clear. What you are doing is running a desperate, catastrophic Ponzi scheme. Let us look at the hard data, Jared. Let us show your proud aunts and uncles exactly how you manage wealth." DeAndre turned his attention to the horrified relatives. 3 weeks ago, Jared quietly drained a joint savings account he shared with Lauren. He took exactly $120,000 in liquid cash. He did not invest it in mutual funds or real estate. He dumped every single penny into an unverified illegal offshore cryptocurrency exchange based in the Bahamas called Zenith Offshore. The platform is currently being investigated by international authorities for massive financial fraud. Jared leveraged that cash on highly risky margin calls, and the exchange completely liquidated his position. He lost the entire life savings in a matter of hours. Whispers erupted around the table. An uncle sitting near the window removed his glasses, rubbing his temples in disbelief. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, staring at her husband as if he were speaking a foreign language. But Jared was already shaking his head, waving his hands frantically to dismiss the facts. "That is a lie," Jared shouted, his voice cracking. "The fund is just locked in a quarterly maturation cycle. You have no idea what you are talking about. You cannot prove any of that." "I am a certified forensic accountant," Jared DeAndre stated coldly. "I track hidden assets for a living. I can trace a single dollar through 10 different shell companies. I know exactly where the money went. And more importantly, I know exactly what you did when you realized you had lost it all, and the exchange demanded more cash to cover your massive compounding debts." DeAndre flipped to the next section of the binder. The pages were filled with legal property deeds and bank routing authorizations. When Jared burned through the savings, he realized he was still millions of dollars in the hole with his offshore creditors. So he decided to commit felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He fabricated entirely new corporate operating agreements for Lauren's cybersecurity firm, Apex Security. He forged her exact signature on multiple legal documents. He then used his professional credentials as an investment broker to illegally secure a secondary mortgage of $300,000 against a commercial property he does not even own. The relative who had gasped earlier now covered her mouth with both hands. The illusion of the golden boy was completely disintegrating before their eyes. Jared was no longer the successful wealthy broker they bragged about to their country club friends. He was a desperate cornered criminal who had stolen from his own wife to feed a crippling gambling addiction. "You are looking at over $3 million in unrecoverable debt," DeAndre concluded, slamming the binder shut. "You are completely bankrupt, Jared, and you are going to federal prison for bank fraud." The silence that followed was suffocating. The reality of the situation crushed the remaining air out of the dining room. Jared collapsed back into his chair, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. His pristine reputation was dead. Suddenly, Barbara leaped to her feet. The shock of her son's total financial ruin had finally pierced her delusion, but true to her toxic nature, she immediately sought a scapegoat. She could not accept that her perfect son was a criminal failure. She pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at me. "This is your fault," Barbara screamed, tears of rage spilling down her cheeks. "You drove him to this, Lauren. You are a cold, unsupportive, selfish wife. You emasculated him with your arrogant little business. If you had just been a proper partner, if you had given him the respect and the financial control he deserved, he would never have had to make those investments. You forced his hand. You pushed my son into this temporary mess because you refused to be a traditional supportive woman." I listened to her unhinged rant with absolute chilling calm. She was still trying to blame me for the actions of a grown man who committed federal fraud. I slowly unzipped my premium leather portfolio. I pulled out the glossy, thick legal document stamped with the bright red seal of the commercial insurance carrier. I walked calmly toward the head of the table. "I am not the one who forced your son to steal Barbara," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "And I am certainly not the one who forced you to commit corporate sabotage." I tossed the heavy document. It slid smoothly across the polished wood, plowing right through a bowl of cranberry sauce, and scattering a silver serving set before coming to a dead stop directly in front of Barbara's trembling hands. "You want to talk about messes?" I said, locking eyes with my horrified mother-in-law. "That is a formal subrogation lawsuit from the insurance provider of a national bank. When you smashed my laptop, you destroyed a live federal security node and corrupted days of sensitive financial data. They have officially assessed the damages, and they are holding you personally and solely responsible. Have fun paying off that $2.5 million corporate liability suit, because unlike Jared, you cannot forge your way out of a federal compliance disaster." Barbara stared down at the thick legal document resting against the cranberry sauce. The bold red stamp of the commercial insurance carrier glared back at her. All the color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled from the water. The sheer magnitude of the number $2.5 million effectively short-circuited her brain. She reached out with a visibly trembling hand, her manicured fingers hovering over the glossy paper, but refusing to actually touch it, as if the lawsuit itself might physically burn her. She looked frantically toward Jared, her golden boy silently begging him to fix this, to tell her it was just a cruel joke. But Jared was slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the ruined turkey, completely paralyzed by his own impending federal prison sentence. He had absolutely nothing left to offer her. The shocked extended family members sitting around the massive dining table were practically holding their breath. A few aunts clutched their cloth napkins to their chests, completely mortified by the spectacular collapse of their relatives. The clinking of silverware and the joyous holiday chatter had been entirely replaced by a suffocating heavy dread. But the execution was not over. DeAndre, still standing tall at the head of the table, turned his cold, analytical gaze away from the ruined mother and son duo. He slowly rotated his broad shoulders to face his wife. Rebecca was sitting frozen in her expensive dining chair, her perfectly styled blonde hair framing a face twisted in absolute confusion and denial. She was desperately trying to process the horrifying reality that her brother was a federal criminal and her mother was facing a multi-million-dollar corporate sabotage lawsuit. DeAndre, Rebecca whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably as she looked up at her imposing husband. Please stop. This has to be a mistake. Jared would never do something like this. My mother just made a silly mistake with a computer. You are taking this too far. You are destroying our family on Thanksgiving. She reached out a trembling hand, pleading with her husband to put the heavy black binder away and restore the comfortable, wealthy illusion she had spent her entire life defending on social media. DeAndre did not soften his stance. His dark eyes remained locked onto his wife, filled with a terrifying mixture of pity and unyielding fury. I am not destroying this family, Rebecca, DeAndre stated, his deep voice cutting through her desperate denial with absolute precision. Your mother and your brother did that all on their own. But you need to understand that Lauren was not their only victim tonight. You need to understand exactly how far your mother was willing to go to protect her favorite child from facing the consequences of his own catastrophic financial failures. DeAndre reached back into the thick binder and pulled out a separate, highly secure bank statement. He held the document up for Rebecca to see, the overhead chandelier illuminating the crisp black text. When Jared illegally leveraged the company Lauren built to secure that $300,000 fraudulent mortgage, the lending bank required a clean, established financial vehicle to receive the massive wire transfer. Jared could not use his own personal accounts because his brokerage firm strictly monitors his liquidity for compliance purposes. If a sudden $300,000 cash injection appeared out of nowhere, his compliance officers would have flagged it immediately. He needed a shadow account to hold the stolen money before he could route it directly to the Bahamas. But more than that, his offshore margin calls were compounding hourly. He needed even more liquid capital to keep his crypto scheme afloat. Rebecca stared at the bank statement in the hands of her husband, her brow furrowing as she tried to comprehend the complex financial jargon. What does that have to do with us? Rebecca asked, her voice trembling as a deep sense of foreboding washed over her. It has everything to do with us, DeAndre replied, stepping closer to her chair. Because Jared did not act alone. He went to your mother crying about his massive offshore debts. And your mother, in her infinite wisdom, decided that saving her golden boy was more important than anything else in the entire world. She agreed to help him hide the stolen mortgage funds, and she agreed to help him find more cash to burn. DeAndre slammed the bank statement down on the table right in front of Rebecca. Look at the routing numbers on that page, Rebecca. Look at the exact name on the account they used to launder the stolen money and fund the offshore crypto exchange. Rebecca slowly lowered her eyes to the damp document resting on the tablecloth. She read the bold print text at the very top of the page. It was the designated educational trust account they had established 5 years ago. It was the sacred, untouchable fund they had rigorously contributed to every single month to guarantee a pristine college education for their 5-year-old son. Rebecca gasped, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The current balance printed clearly on the statement was zero. No, Rebecca choked out, hot tears instantly flooding her eyes and ruining her carefully applied makeup. No, that is impossible, DeAndre. That account requires dual authorization. Jared cannot access that money. I never signed anything to release those funds. I never gave him permission to touch the future of my son. You did not sign anything, DeAndre confirmed, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet register that commanded the attention of the entire room. But your mother did. Your mother forged your exact signature on the trust authorization forms. She walked right into the bank branch, falsely claimed you were incapacitated, and used her status as the grandmother to execute an emergency withdrawal alongside Jared. They completely drained the college fund of your son. They took every single penny we painstakingly saved for his future, and they threw it into a burning offshore crypto scam just to protect Jared from the consequences of his own gambling addiction. The utter silence that swallowed the dining room was absolutely deafening. The aunts and uncles who had previously muttered in shock were now completely speechless, staring at Barbara and Jared with pure unadulterated disgust. Stealing from a wealthy spouse was a crime, but stealing from an innocent 5-year-old child was an unforgivable sin that shattered the very foundation of their familial loyalty. Rebecca sat entirely paralyzed. The smartphone she had used just an hour ago to broadcast malicious lies about me to her thousands of social media followers slipped from her lap and clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. She slowly turned her head to look at her mother. Barbara was physically shrinking into her cashmere sweater, completely unable to meet the devastated gaze of her daughter. Then Rebecca looked across the ruined table at her brother, the handsome, successful broker she had idolized and fiercely defended her entire life. Jared simply stared at the floorboards, refusing to acknowledge the absolute devastation he had purposefully caused. In that horrifying, crystal-clear moment, the entire facade finally shattered. Rebecca understood the brutal, inescapable reality of her actual place in this family hierarchy. She realized that she and her innocent son were nothing more than acceptable collateral damage. They were entirely expendable. They had been ruthlessly sacrificed on the altar of the golden boy, and her own mother had eagerly held the knife. The realization morphed into explosive, unadulterated rage. Rebecca stared at her brother, the golden boy who had been elevated and protected at her direct expense. The years of playing second fiddle, of striving for a maternal approval that was always conditionally tied to how well she supported Jared, finally culminated in a blinding, catastrophic fury. She did not cry anymore. The tears of betrayal instantly vaporized into pure wrath. Rebecca planted her hands firmly on the edge of the heavy dining table and pushed herself up. Her expensive wooden chair tipped backward and crashed violently against the hardwood floor. She did not walk around the table. She launched herself directly across it, her knee planted squarely in the mashed potatoes as she lunged at her brother. Her hand swung through the air with a vicious whistling arc. The slap sounded like a gunshot echoing through the dining room. It struck Jared squarely across his arrogant face, snapping his head to the side with such brutal force that he tumbled entirely out of his chair and crashed hard into the base of the china cabinet. The pristine Thanksgiving dinner officially disintegrated into a screaming, chaotic battleground. Jared scrambled on the floor, clutching his rapidly swelling cheek, his eyes wide with genuine terror. Rebecca did not stop. She stood on top of the ruined feast, completely disregarding the crystal glasses shattering beneath her designer boots. "You stole from your own nephew!" Rebecca shrieked, her voice tearing through the room like a jagged knife. "You drained the future of my son to pay for your pathetic gambling addiction. I defended you. I went online and lied for you. I tried to destroy Lauren to protect you, and you were robbing my child blind the entire time. You are a disgusting, pathetic parasite, Jared." The extended family completely lost their minds. An uncle sitting near the window yelled at Jared, calling him an absolute disgrace to the bloodline. Two aunts hastily grabbed their coats from the backs of their chairs, desperate to flee the immediate vicinity of a collapsing criminal enterprise before they were somehow implicated. Another cousin stood up and began berating Barbara, demanding to know how she could possibly justify forging the signature of her own daughter to steal from a grandchild. The elegant high society facade had been violently ripped away, revealing the rotting, toxic core of a family built entirely on lies, theft, and blind allegiance to a fraudulent golden boy. DeAndre stood back, allowing his wife to unleash her justified fury. He did not intervene to stop her. He let Jared cower on the floor, absorbing the absolute destruction of his social standing and family support. I stood beside DeAndre, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the ultimate payoff unfold with absolute clarity. They were tearing each other apart, and I did not have to lift a single finger to help them do it. They had orchestrated their own demise. Barbara realized she had completely lost control of the narrative. Her son was a disgraced criminal cowering on the floor. Her daughter was screaming with homicidal rage while standing on top of the dining table. The extended family was actively turning against her, hurling insults and backing away in disgust. She was facing a $2.5 million lawsuit, and her theft of the college fund was now public knowledge. She had zero leverage left. So she resorted to her oldest, most reliable manipulation tactic. She decided to play the ultimate victim. Barbara let out a dramatic, high-pitched gasp. She clutched both hands over the center of her cashmere sweater, her eyes rolling back into her head with theatrical precision. "Oh, my heart!" Barbara wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "The stress. You are all killing me. My heart is giving out." With a loud, exaggerated groan, she slowly slumped out of her chair and collapsed onto the floor, carefully ensuring she landed on a soft, decorative rug rather than the hard wood. In years past, this exact performance would have commanded the immediate, frantic attention of the entire room. Jared would have rushed to her side. Rebecca would have screamed for an ambulance. They would have blamed whoever upset her and bent over backward to appease her dramatic demands. But tonight, the dynamic was permanently altered. The room fell silent, but not out of concern. Everyone simply stared down at the matriarch writhing on the rug. Nobody rushed forward to check her pulse. Nobody shouted for a doctor. They all knew exactly what she was doing. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to escape accountability. Rebecca climbed down from the table, stepping over a spilled bowl of stuffing. She looked down at her mother, clutching her chest on the floor. Her eyes were devoid of any daughterly affection. "Get up, Mom," Rebecca stated coldly, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "Stop faking a medical emergency. You are not having a heart attack. You are just terrified because you finally got caught and you have no one left to blame." Barbara cracked one eye open, realizing her ultimate trump card had completely failed. She let out a pathetic whimper, but remained on the floor, too stubborn to admit defeat, but too embarrassed to stand up and face the judgment of her relatives. Jared was still curled near the china cabinet, hyperventilating as the reality of his federal crimes closed in on him. The silence in the dining room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Barbara breathing heavily on the rug and the distant hum of traffic outside. Then the ambient lighting in the room began to shift. Flashing red and blue lights pierced through the sheer curtains of the large front windows, casting an eerie, rhythmic glow across the spilled gravy, the shattered glass, and the disgraced family members. The flashing lights illuminated the walls, signaling the absolute end of the line. The heavy, unmistakable sound of approaching boots echoed from the front porch. Jared let out a strangled sob, pressing his back against the wall as the blue and red lights danced across his terrified face. Barbara suddenly stopped faking her heart attack, sitting straight up on the rug with wide, panicked eyes. A series of loud, authoritative knocks hammered against the heavy oak front door. The federal agents and local police I had contacted regarding the identity theft and wire fraud had finally arrived. The federal agents did not knock a second time. Before anyone in the dining room could move toward the entryway, the heavy oak front door was breached with a sharp, synchronized force. 3 agents wearing tactical windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters FBI moved swiftly into the foyer, flanked by 2 uniformed local police officers. They did not shout or draw weapons, but their physical presence instantly commanded absolute, terrifying authority. Jared Henderson, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying the calm, unmistakable weight of federal law enforcement. His eyes locked directly onto Jared, who was still backed against the china cabinet, hyperventilating. Jared tried to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled squeak escaped his throat. He looked wildly at his mother, begging her to fix this, to scream at the men to leave their perfect suburban home. But Barbara was still sitting on the rug, her fake heart attack completely forgotten, paralyzed by the sheer devastating reality unfolding before her eyes. The lead agent did not wait for a response. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Jared Henderson, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Jared finally found his voice, though it sounded like that of a terrified child. "No," he whimpered, tears spilling freely down his face. "You do not understand. It is a misunderstanding. I am an investment broker. I was just reallocating assets. It was a temporary liquidity measure, Mom, tell them." Barbara did not move. She could not process the fact that her golden boy, the son she had elevated above everyone else, was being publicly branded a federal criminal. The agent grabbed Jared by the shoulder, spinning him around firmly but professionally. The harsh metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the silent dining room, cutting through the lingering smell of roasted turkey and spilled wine. As the officers marched Jared out of the dining room and toward the front door, the entire neighborhood was waiting. The flashing lights had drawn the attention of every resident within a 3-block radius. Patricia, the HOA president who had tried to evict me just weeks prior, was standing on her front lawn in her bathrobe, watching with wide, horrified eyes as the successful investment broker was paraded down the front steps in federal handcuffs. The carefully curated, flawless reputation Jared and Barbara had spent years building was completely and irreparably destroyed in front of the exact audience they desperately wanted to impress. But the execution was not over. While the local police secured Jared in the back of a cruiser, a second individual walked calmly through the open front door. He was a process server, holding a thick, familiar, glossy envelope. He walked purposefully into the dining room, looking past the shattered glass and the terrified relatives until his eyes landed on Barbara, who was still sitting on the decorative rug. Barbara Henderson, the process server, asked politely. Barbara blinked, her mind completely shattered by the arrest of her son. She nodded slowly, almost mechanically. The server handed her the thick envelope. "You have been served," he stated flatly, then turned and walked out, his job complete. Barbara stared down at the envelope resting in her lap. It bore the exact same red stamp as the document I had slid across the table earlier. The $2.5 million corporate sabotage lawsuit was now officially legally active. I stood near the entryway watching her trembling hands clutch the paper. "Because your act of sabotage was intentional and malicious, and because it resulted in an active criminal investigation," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly to Barbara and the remaining stunned relatives. "You cannot discharge this debt through bankruptcy, Barbara. The insurance company will pursue this judgment until every single cent is recovered. They will seize this house. They will garnish your pension. They will drain whatever savings you have left. You are going to spend the rest of your life paying for the moment you decided to smash my laptop just to prove you were in control." Barbara did not scream. She did not throw a tantrum or try to blame me. The sheer, overwhelming weight of absolute financial ruin crushed the remaining fight out of her. She lowered her head, weeping silently, onto the expensive cashmere sweater she would likely have to sell just to afford a consultation with a defense attorney. The extended family members began silently shuffling toward the back exit, desperate to escape the blast radius of this catastrophic familial collapse. They did not offer words of comfort to Barbara or Rebecca. They simply wanted to be as far away from the sinking ship as humanly possible. In the midst of the mass exodus, DeAndre remained standing at the head of the ruined dining table. His posture was rigid, his face an impenetrable mask of cold, calculated resolve. He looked down at Rebecca, who was still sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the front door, where her brother had just been dragged out in handcuffs. Rebecca slowly turned her head to look at her husband. Her eyes filled with desperate, pleading hope. "DeAndre," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are we going to do? We have to help them. My mother is going to lose everything. Jared is going to prison." DeAndre did not soften. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single folded document. He did not hand it to her aggressively. He placed it gently on the table right next to her trembling hands. "I am not going to do anything to help them," Rebecca, DeAndre said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying absolute finality. "Because my only priority right now is protecting the son they stole from." Rebecca looked down at the document. It was not a financial audit or a bank statement. It was a formally drafted, legally binding petition for divorce. "You watched your mother forge your signature to steal our son's future," DeAndre continued, his voice devoid of any warmth or marital affection. "You actively defended the man who laundered that money to feed his gambling addiction. You went online and spread malicious lies to protect the very people who robbed your own child. You sacrificed our son on the altar of your toxic family." Rebecca gasped, tears streaming down her face as she reached out for his arm. "DeAndre, please. I did not know. I swear I did not know about the money until tonight. You cannot leave me over this." DeAndre stepped back smoothly, avoiding her touch. "Ignorance is not an excuse for blind, toxic loyalty, Rebecca. I am seeking full sole custody of our son." I will not allow him to be raised in an environment where he is viewed as acceptable collateral damage to protect a golden boy. You can stay here and comfort your mother as she loses this house. My lawyer will be in touch on Monday." DeAndre turned his back on his weeping wife and walked out of the ruined dining room. I followed right beside him, our footsteps echoing in unison against the hardwood floor. We did not look back at the shattered crystal, the stained tablecloth, or the broken family. We left weeping in the wreckage of their own making. We walked out the front door and into the crisp autumn night, leaving the flashing police lights behind us. The air had never tasted so remarkably clean. 6 months passed with the swift, uncompromising efficiency of a properly executed legal strategy. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but when they finally catch, they grind their targets into absolute dust. Jared learned this lesson the hard way. The arrogant investment broker who once stood in my kitchen demanding I sell my company to fund his offshore gambling addiction was now an inmate in a medium-security federal correctional institution. He traded his tailored Italian suits and expensive silk ties for a scratchy, oversized khaki uniform. The federal prosecutor did not offer him a lenient plea deal. The sheer audacity of his crimes, committing aggravated identity theft, forging corporate documents, and laundering stolen equity through a pediatric trust fund, ensured he received a mandatory minimum sentence that would keep him locked behind reinforced steel doors for a very long time. There were no high-yield returns in federal prison. There were only concrete walls, strict schedules, and the crushing realization that his golden boy status meant absolutely nothing to a federal judge. Barbara faced a destruction that was entirely financial, but equally devastating. The bank's commercial insurance carrier was a ruthless, unyielding corporate machine. They did not care about her manufactured tears or her attempts to play the frail, misunderstood senior citizen. They cared about recovering the $2.5 million she cost them when she maliciously smashed a live federal security node. Because the destruction was classified as an intentional criminal act of corporate sabotage, Barbara was legally barred from discharging the massive liability through bankruptcy. The insurance lawyers systematically dismantled her entire life. They seized the pristine suburban home where she had hosted her disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. They liquidated her assets, auctioned off her luxury vehicles, and legally garnished her retirement pension. Today, the woman who once looked down her nose at my housekeeping skills lives in a cramped, poorly insulated studio apartment on the wrong side of town. A massive percentage of whatever meager income she manages to scrape together will be automatically siphoned away from her bank account for the rest of her natural life, to pay off a debt she can never possibly clear. She has no wealthy son to bail her out and no country club friends willing to associate with a convicted vandal. Rebecca experienced a downfall that shattered both her curated digital reality and her physical world. The night DeAndre dropped the divorce petition on the gravy-stained tablecloth, her superficial social media empire officially died. The family court judge presiding over their custody battle was thoroughly appalled by the evidence DeAndre presented. The financial forensics definitively proved that Rebecca had actively defended and enabled the family members who callously stole her own 5-year-old son's college fund. Consequently, DeAndre was swiftly awarded primary physical and legal custody. Rebecca was granted strictly supervised visitation every other weekend. Stripped of her husband's substantial income and drowning in the immense legal fees generated by her family's collective implosion, Rebecca was forced to enter the real world. The woman who once threatened to ruin my business reputation online now works grueling double shifts as a cashier at a big box supermarket. Her perfectly manicured nails are gone, replaced by the harsh, exhausting reality of scanning barcodes and bagging groceries on her feet for 10 hours a day just to pay off the mounting debts her family left her saddled with. I sat comfortably on the expansive cedar balcony of my $1.2 million home. The evening air was warm and peaceful, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the garden below. The house was quiet, perfectly secure, and entirely mine. The heavy glass sliding door opened smoothly behind me. DeAndre stepped out onto the balcony, bringing the rich, complex aroma of a premium Cabernet Sauvignon with him. He was no longer just the brother-in-law who had seen through the lies. Following the finalization of his divorce, I had officially contracted DeAndre as the lead independent forensic auditor for Apex Security. His unmatched ability to track hidden financial threats made him an invaluable asset to my corporate infrastructure. DeAndre handed me a crystal glass filled with dark red wine. He clinked his glass gently against mine. To a highly successful second quarter, DeAndre said, his deep voice carrying a tone of genuine peace and professional satisfaction. The new federal contracts are fully integrated and the compliance audits are flawless. To absolute security, I replied, taking a slow, satisfying sip of the wine. I rested my sleek digital tablet on the glass patio table. The screen was illuminated with the evening financial news. A breaking news alert flashed across the top banner. International authorities had just conducted a massive coordinated raid on Zenith Offshore, the exact cryptocurrency exchange Jared had used to gamble away his stolen funds. The entire executive board of the fraudulent platform was being indicted for running a multi-billion-dollar global Ponzi scheme. The digital house of cards had finally collapsed, taking every arrogant, greedy investor down with it. It was the perfect symmetrical closure to a chaotic chapter. I looked out over the meticulously manicured lawns of my quiet, upscale neighborhood. I had built an impenetrable fortress with my own two hands. I had survived their gaslighting, their financial predation, and their desperate attempts to tear me down. I took another sip of wine, feeling the cool breeze brush against my face. When she yelled at me to clean the house and serve her son, she forgot one crucial rule. The woman who owns the house and holds the data holds all the power, and I don't serve parasites. The dramatic saga of Lauren and her destructive in-laws serves as a gripping masterclass in the absolute necessity of financial independence and ironclad boundaries. Often society conditions us to keep the peace within family dynamics, urging us to swallow blatant disrespect and tolerate toxic behavior for the sake of artificial harmony. However, this narrative completely shatters that dangerous misconception by illustrating exactly what happens when you refuse to play the perpetual victim. The profound lesson here is that true empowerment does not stem from winning an emotional screaming argument. It comes from tangible structural preparation and self-reliance. Lauren survived a coordinated assault on her home, her reputation, and her livelihood because she had the brilliant foresight to protect her assets through a limited liability company and maintain sole control over her corporate data. When confronted with the massive federal financial fraud of Jared and the destructive entitled tantrums of Barbara, Lauren did not waste her precious energy crying or begging for their understanding. Instead, she utilized forensic audits, federal compliance laws, and unyielding logic to systematically dismantle their abuse. Her intense journey reminds us that malicious individuals will happily exploit your empathy using guilt and familial obligation as weapons to drain your hard-earned resources. Jared and Barbara genuinely believed they were entitled to the success Lauren built, willing to sacrifice anyone, even the college trust fund of their own young nephew, to preserve their pathetic illusions of grandeur. By remaining remarkably calm and leaning on hard evidence rather than emotional retaliation, Lauren successfully protected her peace and her corporate empire. We must all learn to stop serving parasites who only wish to drain us. Take a close look at your own relationships today and firmly establish the non-negotiable boundaries needed to protect your peace, your assets, and your future.